Hello there, welcome back. You are listening to the Photography Made Simple podcast with me, your host, Audrey-Ann from Live Snap Love, where I aim to help you capture the beauty of your days through photography. Now, when you hear photographers talk about their photography journeys, they will probably all tell you that they had different aha moments or light bulb moments that just changed the way they looked at their photos and changed their ability to take certain types of photos. Now, I have had plenty of different aha moments over the course of the last 17 years now that I've had a camera in one form or another. But today I want to share just 3 of those with you. 3 times when I can look back on my photography journey and think that doing these things made such a difference to my images. And the good news is none of the things I am about to share with you will cost you any money or require you to buy any new gear or get a new lens. It's all just about shifting what you can do with what you have already. Okay, so let's get started with the first aha moment that I had in my photography journey. And that was changing from using flat light to directional light. So let's start by talking about what flat light actually is. So flat light is when you have your subject facing directly into the light source. In other words, the light is coming and hitting them flat on the face. So as I am recording this podcast, I'm actually sitting facing into a window, and that is having flat light on me. So when you have that, you have your subject facing toward the window or the light source, whatever it may be, and there's no shadowing really on their face, that is flat light. Directional light, on the other hand, is when the light hits the subject from a direction. In other words, it hits them from the side, or it could even be from the back, but essentially it's not falling flat on the face anymore. It's coming from the side, and as such, you will have one area that is lit and one area that is in shadow. Now you can play with the amount of directional light you have. In other words, play around with the amount of shadow on your subject, but essentially you have that directionality to the light. You have areas of light and shadow on your subject. Now I'm talking about people here specifically, but actually this applies to all subjects, whether you're photographing a dog, or you're photographing a vase of flowers or a still life of some fruit, doesn't matter. You still want to have that directional light on your subject. And the reason we want that is because it gives our images more depth. So what you have to remember is that when you take an image, you're flattening a 3-dimensional world that our eyes can take on and see these different depths and dimensions, and we're flattening it into this 2-dimensional one. And so anything we can do to bring back depth helps get more emotion and just allows the viewer to feel more like they are viewing an image that they could almost step into or they could reach out and touch. And we do that by adding depth. And one way to do that is by making sure that we use directional light to add in those shadows. So again, this is a really simple thing for you to do because it doesn't require any change to what you've already been doing. Just simply, if you are having your subject facing toward the light all the time, or you're always shooting with the light at your back, then I want you to kind of change that around and shoot so that the light is coming in from the side on your subject. Now, if you want to take it a little step further, you can get really directional with your light and just have a small shaft of light on your subject. So if you have a room with a small window, then you can use that so that your subject is sitting more in a pocket of light. Or you can close the blinds to create it, or shut the curtains, shut off all the other light sources in the room so that the light is getting more and more directional. So you can totally play around with this, and you can play around with whether you have your subject turned slightly toward the light source and slightly away and so on. We can do so many things when playing with the direction of the light. But I really want you to start to think about changing from using flat light to using directional light. And you'll find that you'll get images that have more depth and more dimension, and therefore have that more three-dimensional quality to them. The next thing that made such a difference in my photography journey was really being aware of all of my settings and taking control of them myself. Now, obviously, if you're shooting in full auto mode, then the camera is making all of the decisions for you. And we don't really want that. We don't want a piece of, wires and metal that can't see and react to a scene in the same way that you can be control of our images. Your camera cannot see. It is a very clever piece of equipment, and it should be considering how much they cost. But it can't see. It cannot see and react to a scene. So it doesn't know what you want the scene to look like. It doesn't know what you're photographing. It gets all of its clues from you. And the more clues you can give it, the more the image that you create is going to look like the one that you can see in your mind. So when I say taking control of all of your settings, I do actually mean all of your settings. You want to be shooting in manual mode so that you are controlling the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO yourself. And I really want you to pay attention to each of these, and each one changes how your images look and feel, whether you choose a small aperture or a large aperture, whether you slow the shutter speed down or speed it up, whether you use a high ISO or a low ISO, they all have changes both on the exposure of your image, but also how the image looks. So really taking control of these and deeply thinking about what is the best aperture for this scene, what is the best shutter speed for this scene, what is the best ISO for this scene, really drilling down and thinking about it and leaving pretty much none of it up to the camera. You get to decide all three. I also mean moving away from the other auto settings and taking control. For example, taking control of your own focus point, your own focusing mode, and your white balance. Just always remember that the more you can take control of your camera, the more the image will look and turn out the way that you want it to. So I think we've all experienced this in the beginning of our photography journey, where our images just don't match what we see in our head. We can see the image we want to take, or we've seen an image from a photographer and we try and recreate something similar, but we can't get our images to look like that. Or we can, but we luck out with it and we can only do it from time to time. If that's happening with you, it's because you're not taking control. It's because you're leaving everything up to the camera, or you're leaving the final decisions up to the camera. In other words, you're maybe going to leave focus up to the camera, but you're going to choose your aperture, but you'll leave the shutter speed and ISO up to the camera. We don't want to do that. The more control you get, the more the image will look exactly the way that you want it to. So that first one was using more directional light. Believe me, it makes such a huge difference to your images and makes them look much more touchable. And that second one was taking control of all of the camera settings yourself. The more you take control, the more the image will look like the one that you picture in your head. And the third one is being really intentional with the details in the frame. So what do I mean by the details? Well, this can mean absolutely everything. I want you to think about every single pixel that you have in your frame. So think about the background. Think about the clutter that is in the frame. Is it adding to the image or is it distracting from your subject? Sometimes an image will look great because of the clutter that's in there. It helps tell part of the story. Other times it's just distracting our viewer's eye away from the subject. We also want to think about clothing choices. Now, I know depending on who you're photographing, you don't always get a lot of choice, but if you are photographing your children, whether that be lifestyle or documentary, or you're taking a portrait image, the clothing your subject wears has a huge impact on how the final image will turn out. So really make sure that you make good clothing choices for your subject that means they don't blend into the frame. You know, for example, wearing a forest green t-shirt in a forest might mean that they sort of disappear completely. It might mean looking to make sure that they don't have anything with too much logos on it, for example. So really making sure that the clothing choices work for you. The other thing we can look at is the colors we use in the frame, making sure that the colors balance and complement one another, or sort of go together, basically. Or we can also look at the colors in the frame to convey a mood or emotion. We also want to think about the composition and using the various elements in the frame to use some compositional guidelines to draw the eye or add interest. For example, if there's any lines in the frame, we can use them to draw a leading line towards our subject. If there's something that is creating a natural frame, for example, a doorway, again, we can use that. We can also layer our images by having something in the foreground, the midground, and the background. Again, another thing that is helping add that depth to your image and make it look more three-dimensional. So the crucial thing there is that you're being intentional of every aspect of the frame. What is in the frame around you? How can you use that to get a great composition? You're thinking about the clothing choices that are in the frame as well. You're thinking about the colors that are in there. And you're thinking about, is that background complementing or pulling the eye? Is this telling the story that I want to tell? Really looking at your frame, and instead of thinking, well, that just happens to be there, so there's nothing I can do about that. Yes, there is. You can change your shooting position. You can, for example, shoot down on your subject. I have taken many a portrait in an area that has been incredibly cluttered simply by standing on a chair and shooting down on my subject, and that gets rid of all the clutter. So we can definitely do so much just by changing the angle that we shoot from as well. So always keep in mind that you are responsible for absolutely everything in the frame. If it's there, it's because you allowed it to be. So make choices of everything that is in the frame and make sure that you are choosing to have the right elements in there that is going to elevate your images to the next level. Now you can see that none of the three things that I've shared with you today require you to get a new lens or even learn anything new to a degree. It's all just shifting a little bit of perspective and how you shoot. So just as that quick recap, the first is using directional light. In fact, just changing the light that you use and switching it up and getting more nuanced with your use of light will have a huge impact on your photos. Now, I do actually have a free Mastering Natural Light guide. So if you want to get a hold of that, I will leave a link to it around where you're listening to this podcast, or you can just go to livesnaplove.com/light-guide. That's livesnaplove.com/light-guide, and that will give you a free guide to mastering natural light. So as I say, just learning light in general will have a huge impact on your images, but just for getting started, stop using flat light and switch to using more directional light. If you're already using directional light, try making it even more directional. You can get fabulously dark and moody images just by doing this. The second one that we had was just taking control of all of your settings yourself and really considering the impact that each one is going to have on your image. Just remember that the more settings you control, the more the image is going to look the way that you want it to. And the third thing was being intentional about every aspect of the frame. Remember that you are in control. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, I know, but you are in control. Have a think about absolutely everything in the frame, and the more intentional you can be about what's in there, again, the more polished and professional your images are going to look. So there you have it, 3 different things that you can do today to take your images to the next level. Now, of course, I have lots of other aha moments, but these are 3 that definitely just changed my images for the better pretty much immediately, almost overnight, because I made that conscious switch of really starting to think about the light, my settings, and my composition. And doing those 3 things are going to have a huge impact on your images. So that's it from me for this week. Don't forget to download that Mastering Natural Light Guide if you would like to get your hands on it. I'll leave a link to it around where you're listening to this podcast. And don't forget, also you can head to livesnaplove.com. If you go to livesnaplove.com/everything, you'll actually see everything that we have. All of our freebies, including that Mastering Natural Light Guide, all of our freebies, all of our paid courses, everything is there. So if you want help with a specific aspect of photography, whether that be your camera settings, or whether that be light, or whether that be editing, go ahead, go to that livesnaplove.com/everything page, and you can get the freebies, courses, and everything that we have there. And again, I'll leave that link around where you're listening to this podcast. So I will see you again at same time, same place next week. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you again next week. Otherwise, have an absolutely great week, and I will see you then.